It's a real pleasure to be here. I've always enjoyed coming to Seattle, and this is no exception. I feel a little bit awkward speaking to you for one reason, and that is that I'm sure that everybody in this room knows more about Tableau than I do. I am a Tableau user, and I have my expert help here with me that knows how to use Tableau, but I am not a Tableau user. On the other hand, I do something that you may find to be interesting. Is I prepare data, or we have technology for preparing data for use in Tableau. And in particular, we're able to take unstructured data and to take the unstructured data and turn it into a form that's useful for visualization and analytics from Tableau. So whereas I'm not a Tableau user by any stretch of the imagination, I am pretty good at preparing data for usage in the world of Tableau. Now, I want to talk, before we get started, a little bit about the world of unstructured data, because I don't know if you know it or not, but there's different kinds of unstructured data. When people see text, they automatically think unstructured data. And is that true? Well, kind of true. So let me explain what I mean. If you were to have some forms to fill out where you have name and address and city and perhaps college degree or something like that, you certainly would have text there, and you could consider that to be unstructured data, but it's not really unstructured data. It's really what we would call semi-structured data. And dealing with semi-structured data is actually a fairly easy thing to do. What we're talking about today is a different form of unstructured data, and the form of unstructured data that we are going to be talking about is deeply unstructured data. Now, what do I mean by deeply unstructured data? Well, deeply unstructured data is the kind of information that we find in a free form fashion. Let me give you a couple of examples of deeply unstructured data. Number one, conversation. That when you're holding a conversation with somebody, there's nothing that tells you what to say. You're free to say anything, any way you want to say it. Another example are emails. You take emails, and the information that's found in emails, you can write anything you want in any form and any structure that you would like. And then the list goes on. And there's some kind of interesting activities on the list that we're going to talk about. One of them that we happen to be doing a lot of work in right now that's most interesting are medical records. That if you've taken a look at medical records, you'll find that medical records are full of narrative. And it's this narrative that gives people the hardest time of trying to take and put that narrative in the form that can be used and analyzed by a computer. So before we start, I wanted to make it clear what I'm talking about. When I talk about unstructured data today, I'm not talking about the semi-structured data, and I'm not talking about plain old text. I'm talking about deeply unstructured data. Now, I don't know if you know it or not, but it is estimated that in the corporation today, somewhere between 60 and 80% of the data is of this deeply unstructured variety. And you go into the corporation and you find memos, you find letters, you find email, you find conversations, you find all sorts of information in the corporation, and you then ask yourself the question, is this deeply unstructured information being used in the decision-making, analytical processing in the corporation today? And the answer is almost certainly it is not. And why is it not being used? It's not being used because you can't analyze it. You can't put it into a form that you can use Tableau with. And so today I'm here to talk to you about that particular subject. How do we start to leverage the power of Tableau against this most interesting form of data that's found in the corporation? Because I'm going to be showing you today that indeed you can do it, that you can get into this deeply unstructured data and start to analyze it, rework it, and put it into a form that you can use with Tableau. And in fact, we're going to see an example of it today. I'm not going to just talk about it. I'm going to show it to you in terms of an example. So I wanted to clarify this before we get started because I've walked around and talked to any number of people in this the exposition booth that we have outside here, had some really interesting conversations, and I keep hearing, well, we do unstructured data, but when you talk to them about unstructured data, you find that what they're really talking about is just text or semi-structured data. It's when you get into this deeply unstructured data that to date I've not found anybody that can really handle that kind of information. So with that in mind, having you understand that there are different kinds of unstructured data, let's go ahead and do our conversation today. By the way, we're going to show an example today of call center information. But before we even start, I want to make it clear that whereas call center information is very interesting information unto itself, by no means is call center information the only kind of unstructured, deeply unstructured data that can be handled. It happened to be the one that we have got a good example in Tableau. We've got some really interesting things that I hope you'll find to be of interest. But I don't want you walking out here thinking about this presentation is about call center. Call center is merely one of the examples that we have, and it's the one that shows best for today's presentation. So with that in mind, let's talk about call centers. What is a call center? Most corporations have call centers. And what is a call center? A call center is where there's a bank of operators that sit there that work for the company. These operators sit there and have conversations and talk about anything that people want to call up. There's an 800 number, and you pick up the phone and you say, you compliment the company, or you complain about a product, or there's a million things that go on in a call center. And so do corporations have them? I'm sure there's some corporation in the world that doesn't have them, but most large corporations have call centers. Now let's ask an interesting question. What happens when you go into a corporation and ask them, do you guys know what's going on in your call center? And the answer is, oh yeah, we know what's going on in our call center. And it says, okay, well tell me what's going on. It says, well, what's going on in our call center is we can tell you how many calls we get, and we can tell you how long the call exists. Our calls last 6.5 minutes, and we have 8,000 a day. And I say, well, that's interesting information. That's useful information. But that's not exactly what I had in mind. When I said, can you tell me what's going on in your call center, what were people talking about? Were they complaining? Were they asking to buy a new product? Were they making suggestions? Were they wanting to pass the time of day? And said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't tell you about that. I don't know. But I can tell you how many call centers we get per day. And so let me ask you this. From a standpoint of business value, do you think that there's business value in understanding what it is that's going on in your call center? And the answer is, I think so. I think that, in fact, it's pretty hard to find in your corporation anything that has more business value than that, because this is a direct line to your customers and prospects. This is your chance as a corporation to find out what's being said, what's on their mind, what is of interest. So in terms of business value, it's pretty hard to say that there isn't business value in call centers, because I think there's a whole lot of business value there. And yet, corporation after corporation knows nothing about their call center of what's going on. So this is what you get. You say, well, we know about our call centers. We get 8,000 a day and they last 6.5 minutes. Well, thanks for telling me that, but that's not really getting to the point of understanding what's on your customer's mind. And so let's take a look at a call center. Now, this is real information. Over here on the right-hand side, we have some unstructured, textual, free-form, deeply unstructured information. And I'm going to read a couple of these. I'm just going to pick out a couple of random ones. This, by the way, is for a telephone company. And by the way, this is a large telephone company. You might be surprised to know how many call centers they get, how many call center activities a day they get. They get, on the average, 86,000 phone calls a day. Now, between you and me, 86,000 phone calls, that's a lot of phone calls. But let's take a look at what some of these messages are. Customer has no on-demand affected by outage, unable to make recordings, freezing on pause. No working power supply from another setup box, parental control. Deanna called with issues on her new cable box. So this is the kind of thing that go through your call center activity. So this is a form of deeply unstructured data that when a person calls up in the call center, they can say anything they want. They can pass the time of day. They can talk about the Seattle Seahawks. They can do whatever they want in the call center. And so this is what we have. Now, what does this company do today with their call center information? Well, over here on the left-hand side, immediately to the left of the descriptive conversation, they have a very brief piece of information that says such things as DVR recording, customer education. So there is some attempt at trying to get customer information and analyzing the call center information. But the truth is that because the data is in an unstructured, deeply unstructured format, that the data is not, you're not getting really useful information to management about the customer. So what could we do? Well, we could introduce some technology you probably haven't heard of before. Technology is called Textual Disambiguation. And here we take the textual information, the deeply unstructured information, pass it through textual ETL, and create a relational database. And in creating a relational database, we can then take Tableau and use Tableau to do an analysis of what's going on in the call center today. So this is what can be done with something called textual disambiguation. So let's take a look at a visualization done in Tableau. Now this is real stuff. These are real telephone calls, and this visualization we'll introduce the gentleman that did this in just a few seconds. But this is the Tableau visualization, and I just want to describe it to you. Over here on the left-hand side is we have a synopsis of the calls and what was going on in the conversations. And we have such information as we had 9,676 diagnostic calls. We had 8,988 actionable calls. We had 6,601 functional calls, etc., and so forth. So, number one, we've taken the calls and categorized them. And if nothing else, this information about what people are talking about up here on the left-hand side is extremely useful information. But there's more. What we find is down here on the bottom is a nice demographic of the hours of the day and what is going on during the daytime. To no one's great surprise, at 2 or 3 in the morning, we don't have much going on. However, go to 9 or 10 in the morning, and we start to see this is where we get to activity. And we don't just find out what kind of activity is there. You'll notice these little colors. We're able to, with Tableau, determine what kind of activity is on people's mind, and if we want to drill down and find out what information about the kinds of activity is occurring. So this is a gold mine for the executive that wants to know what's going on in your call center. This is what's going on in your call center. Now, on top of the 24-hour analysis, we have a daily analysis. We have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, etc., and so forth. And we have the same kind of demographic analysis by day of the week. Now, it turned out that Tuesday was a holiday, so that's why Tuesday looks kind of stunted. But this is the information presented a different fashion. Not only can we look at it on an hour-by-hour basis, we can look at it and break it down demographically by the day of the week. And again, if you're a manager and your boss walks into you and says, what's going on in our call center? What kind of information do you want? This is the kind of information that you want. Now, on top of that is yet a third demographic, and the third demographic is our third graph is one of looking at the heat map of the call center activity over the period of a month. Here we have the 1st of the month to the 31st of the month, and we see a heat map of the demographics of the calls as they came in. So this, from a standpoint of trafficking activity, is what can be done with Tableau in answering the question of what's going on in your call center. Now, here in the middle, in black and gray and shades of gray, are yet perhaps the most interesting and important part of the graphic. And this shows that what we have are the actual topics that were discussed. What is it that people were talking about when they called up and talked about their activities? And so here we see STB, that's shorthand for setup box, then TV, and then not working and remote and VOD and menu and trouble, etc., and so forth. So if you're a manager and you want to start to understand what's going on in your call center activity, this is how you do it. This is how you would use Tableau to do it. And in order to use Tableau, you've got to take the textual information, the deeply unstructured textual information, and turn it into a useful form. Now, I would like to take this moment to give credit to the person that did this. Chris, if you could stand up. I'd like to introduce Chris Cox from Boulder, and he is our genius for Tableau. Any easy questions I'll take. Any hard questions come to Chris, and that's the way we play this game. And at any rate, this was done by Chris, taking the data that we had processed from the unstructured format. So I just want to give credit where credit is due. So let's talk a little bit about how all of this occurs. When I was talking to Sasha Pasulka from Tableau about this presentation, he said, Bill, thanks for telling us all this, but we want to know what is it you do in this textual disambiguation to take this unstructured, deeply unstructured text and turn it into a form that can be used and made whole enabled by Tableau. And so from an architectural standpoint, it's pretty simple. We take the unstructured data, we pass it through technology called textual ETL, and from there we create a standard relational database. That's architecturally what's going on. Let's talk about this, however. When you get into the subject of textual disambiguation, you make very quickly the discovery that language is complex. You know, language is kind of interesting because most of us learned language when we were 1 or 2 years old, and we learned it from our father and mother and brothers and sisters, and we take language for granted. We think, language, you know, we speak it, everybody speaks it. It turns out when you start to turn language into something that needs to be analyzed, it is complex. You just won't believe how complex it really is until you try to do it. By the way, just for your information, this whole process of textual disambiguation has been in the works for about 12 years' time. It's taken 12 years to get to the point where we're at today. So let's take a look at language. This, folks, is a document. This is what language looks like. And you say, gee, Bill, is this really what you're going to use as input and turn into a relational database? And the answer is absolutely right. This is whether it's a medical record, or whether it's an email, or whether it's a call center conversation, whether it's a legal contract, you name it, this is what text looks like. And so you've got to be able to go in here and read and understand and take this textual information and turn it into something that is meaningful and useful. So how do you do that? Well, I'm going to give you a glimpse as to the sorts of things that you look for inside this text. One thing you look for is proximity analysis. You don't just look for words, you look for phrases of words, and you find out how close the words are together. Another thing you do is something called date standardization. I don't know if you ever thought about it, but if you've got 5 or 6 documents sitting there in a row, there's no guarantee that any 2 people are going to use the same terminology for a date. One person writes date one way, another person writes date another way. Now, when you and I read date, our brains magically convert date into something we understand. But does the computer understand that? Not at all. The computer's got to be able to do this textual disambiguation to, number 1, recognize it as a date, number 2, recognize what date it is, and number 3, reformat it into a common format. A third thing we have is something called custom variable formatting. Custom variable formatting says that on occasion you will have a variable that is recognizable from its format itself. Such things in the United States as telephone number. If you see the sequence of digits that make up a telephone number, you immediately recognize this is a telephone number. And so, and then it turns out within the corporation, there are many, many different ways that corporations create their own way of doing custom variable formatting. Then probably the most common way is something through taxonomy, ontology, resolution. I don't know if you've ever dealt with taxonomies, but in the world of taxonomies, the simplest way I explain taxonomies are they are lists. I could have, example, a car. A car could be a Ford, a Porsche, a Honda, a Kia, and a Ferrari. Those would all be cars, and that's a very simple listing of cars. And so identifying things and decontextualizing things through taxonomies and ontologies is another important aspect of textual disambiguation. Then there's one called Inline Contextualization. On occasion, where the text that you're working with is predictable, you're able to understand the context and meaning of text by what surrounds it. So this just gives you a little bit of insight as to what it is that needs to be done to text in order to take this text and put it into a relational format. Once you put it in the relational format, now you can start to use Tableau in order to do wonderful visualizations, as we have seen. So let's take a look at some of these forms of textual disambiguation. Let's take one. If you heard the Dallas Cowboys always play on Thanksgiving. The Dallas Cowboys, I'm sure you'll recognize, is a once great football team. And they don't like that when I say that in Texas, by the way. They get really offended. But unfortunately, it's true. If you hear Dallas Cowboys, you immediately think of a football team. But if you had a document in which in the first paragraph there were Dallas, and on the third page later was Cowboys, you would think of something very different. So looking at things in terms of proximity is one of the features of being able to create a relational database from raw, deeply unstructured text. Let's take a look at taxonomies and ontologies. Here we have a simple taxonomy. A car can be a Honda, Ford, Volkswagen, Porsche, or Toyota. And here we have some raw text at the top. We take that raw text and read it, and when we come across the word Honda, we recognize that to be a car. When we run across the word Volkswagen, we recognize that to be a car, etc., and so forth. So this then is pardon me, a simple example of what we mean by using taxonomies and by the way, taxonomies and ontologies. This world gets to be a very complex world. And you say, gee, Bill, aren't there a lot of taxonomies out there in the world? And the answer is absolutely yes. I'd like to say that we work closely with the world's largest provider of commercial taxonomies, a company called WAND Incorporated. It may surprise you to know that there are organizations out there that actually have generic commercial taxonomies and ontologies that you can plug into. Now, you can create your own taxonomy if that's what you think you want to do, but most organizations say we have better things to do with our time and our staff than to sit around and create taxonomies. Let's take another example, inline contextualization. Here we have some kind of legal document that says, whereas John Quincy, as tenant in common, has purchased. This might be something a lawyer would write. We recognize that John Quincy is the subject we're looking for because we have a beginning delimiter and an ending delimiter. And so when we have predictable text, such as that found in a contract and other places, we can make inferences by looking at beginning and ending delimiters to determine what it is that we're looking at. This is a form of textual disambiguation called inline contextualization. Then we have custom variables. Here we have, we recognize that there is a part number in my corporation known as OL995AT. And I recognize that from the understanding that there is a common format of 2 capital characters, 3 numeric characters, 2 characters in lowercase with hyphens separating the different values here. So I have these custom variables. This is an example of how that would look. Another example is date standardization. Here we have on July 20th, 1945, the singer known as Kim Carnes was born, came into this earth. By the way, does anybody here know Kim Carnes? Anybody familiar? She sang a song called Betty Davis Eyes a while back, and a little fact. The reason why I know that July 20th, 1945 is Kim Carnes' birthday is because it's my birthday as well. So I was reading about Kim Carnes on the internet the other day and thought, oh my God. And I even thought about writing a letter because I don't think I've ever known anybody. I've known people that have had the same day that I was born on, but not the same year. Turns out she was born in California on the same day, on the same year. So I may write her a letter one of these days. But at any rate, Kim Carnes was born on July 20th, 1945. We recognize that date and we turn it into a common date format. So this is what we end up with. We end up with a standard relational database. And you look at this, and if you've been a database administrator anywhere, you say, oh, I recognize that. That's just another relational database. And in fact, it is. When you take a look at the database, you find such things very familiar to you: document name, the value that you're looking at, the byte, and the context. So let's take a little bit closer look at this because there's some tricky things going on here. Okay, over here we have context on the right-hand side and the value in the middle. And this says the recorder on date 12/10 was Maricopa County. And so here we have the value and the context. And it turns out that when you're doing this, context is easily the most difficult part to find out. Any fool can find the content itself. That's what semi-structured people do. That's what you can do in Hadoop. That's what you can do in MapR. That's easy to do. It's the context part over here, it turns out, is the difficult part. That content of the text is the easy part, context of the text is the hard part. And then after you finished, you call Chris Cox on the phone and say, hey, Chris, I got something for you. And Chris says, well, Bill, we need to schedule that. And okay, well, we'll see you next week. And we come up and we show Chris this, and he takes this, and then he turns this into a wonderful visualization in Tableau. So that's how you go from deeply unstructured text to the world of Tableau. And once in Tableau, let me tell you a little story. Let me make a plug for Tableau here because it certainly is deserved. I have to tell you, the technology of being able to create relational databases has actually been around for a while. We've had it ready and commercially ready for 3 or 4 years. And I can't tell you the number of times when I've stood in front of audiences and showed them this wonderful database that we've created. And you know what reaction we get? We get this, he can create a database, that's interesting. Then we discovered Chris Cox and Tableau, and we said, let's take this database and turn this into a visualization. And once we started showing the same information in the form of a visualization, people, you can't believe the reaction people had. Oh, we have to have that. That tells our management what we needed. That's what we've been wanting to do all along. And it's been just amazing because, to be honest with you, I'll be honest with you, this is the same information as this right here. But what do you think that people, management, and corporations respond to? When it comes to databases, they go to sleep. When it comes to visualizations like this, they say, now I understand. Now you give me what I want. This is what I want. And listen, as far as we're concerned, we think that's the greatest thing going. If putting it in Tableau and having our friend Chris Cox available, but I'm not a Tableau technician. You can ask me all the Tableau questions you want, and you're going to get this much from me because this is what I know. But I do know this guy's phone number down here, and so I'm going to give you his phone number down here. But I'm going to tell you right now, the number of organizations I've shown, well, we can create a database to, they say, so what? You show them this, and they say, wow, this is what we want. This speaks to management. And if that's what it takes to speak to management, sounds good to me. So anyway, but in order to get to that point of creating the visualization from Tableau, you've got to go through this step. And I'm going to tell you, this is a non-trivial step. Being able to take that raw text and turn that raw text into a form that can be used by Tableau is something that is not particularly easy or straightforward to do. So content is the easy part. Context is the hard part. So let's now talk about this. You say, gee, Bill, you showed me a really nice example of call centers, and I think I believe you. At least I've given you the time of day to listen to what you said. Where else might we find a use for this kind of information? Well, it turns out that there's all kinds of uses for this kind of information. Let me start with one that we happen to be doing a lot of work in right now, and that's in the area of medical records. That if you've ever taken a look at medical records, doctors write and think in terms of narrative. In fact, I had a discussion with my doctor just the other day, and I was talking about medical records, and my doctor says, Bill, in order for a medical record to be useful and meaningful to a doctor, it's got to be in the form of a narrative. If you put it in any other form, it just doesn't make any sense. And I, as a technician, say, but, doctor, as long as that medical record is in the form of narrative, then that medical record is not useful to the analyst. Just because you can read a record, what would happen if you had 1 million records to be read? You want to look at the demographics of the people that have a given disease. You can't read the records. Can't be done. And I don't use the word can't lightly. Can't be done. And in order to do that, you've got to use the computer. So we've got this real conflict here. We've got the doctor and the nurse that have got to have the record in the form of narrative, but we've got the analyst that's got to have the record in the form of a computerized technology. So this is where textual ETL comes in. Textual ETL forms the bond between the communities that have got to serve medicine and healthcare. Email. There's some really interesting examples in email. I'm just going to wave my hands and say, and there's some other interesting things. But there's a lot of interesting things in email. And if you're interested in looking at email, I know how you can do it. Corporate contracts. You'd be surprised at the corporations that have no idea of what's in their corporate contracts. And why? Because they say, oh, gee, it's in the form of text. We can't do anything with it. Says, no. You can do something with it. You can take those contracts and put them into the form of a database, and now you can look at 1 million contracts. You can do a query on 1 million contracts. Warranties, insurance claims, human resources, letters. The list of the usage of deeply unstructured information is a long, long list. And in our corporations today, we're just barely scratching the surface in being able to take a look at this list. And by the way, the role of Tableau is one of ultimate importance. I look at it as a relay race. Yes, you've got to have this infrastructure in place, but the last runner on the relay race is Tableau. If you don't have Tableau, you're just in the position of creating databases, and we joke that there's probably 3 people on this earth that really get excited about creating databases. The other 99.999% of people on this earth want their visualization. So I want to leave you with a little formula, a simple-minded formula. Your deeply unstructured data plus the process of textual disambiguation plus Tableau lead to business value. Business value that can't be found any other way. And you know, it's interesting. It's easy for me to come up here and talk to you about this because in my heart of hearts, do I believe this? Listen, I believe it. I know this to be true. I don't believe it. I know this to be true. So it's easy to talk about something that you know to be true. So now you can unlock the text that's found in your corporation, something you couldn't do before, and a big part of that equation is displaying your results in Tableau. Okay, that's our presentation for today. Any easy questions I'll accept. Thank you.